Good evening from the McDowell Marigold Cottage living room. We are a couple days out of supposedly some big storm that's going to hit the south. So I don't know, I moved south so I would have less snow, but that doesn't seem to be happening. I'm sitting here in my living room and the whole, like half of the floor is covered in pepper plants that I was trying to save from my garden, and they had been living in the garage, but the temperatures are going down to the lows in like the low 20s or the single digits. And so I brought them in. And so I've only lost one so far. So we'll see how that goes. I don't know how they're going to adjust to going back out in the garage when their time is up, but they're here keeping me company. And I've been spending the day today. I'm still on the owl patrol. So I've got another owl underway, and having fun playing with all of my embroidery floss and all the colors. So it's nice to be tucked in the winter and be a little creative. And I was going to start the part 2 of Babel 17. And I'm kind of excited because it seems like there's views on the first part. Usually the read alouds don't get that many views, and there's only one comment. So I don't know if people click in and they're like, oh, this is boring, and then they leave. But I will get to part 2 because I think I'm going to be snowed in for a good part of the weekend. And fingers crossed, everybody, we're on like the snow ice line, and that it's not, I can live with snow, but I really don't want like long-term power outages because I don't have a backup generator. And if it's 7 degrees, I don't want my pipes to freeze. So please, everybody, just send Hot Springs, Arkansas some good juju that we just have like some nice fluffy snow, and we can all just tuck in until next Monday or Tuesday, and then it'll melt and it'll all be good. So that's what I'm imagining that I'm going to manifest that outcome. But I did get a couple of little space heaters, as long as the electricity doesn't go out from my basement where my water heater and washing machine and stuff are. So there's a lot of plumbing down there when I keep it warm enough. And yeah, so I was going to do the reading, but I feel like I want to just do a little bit of an impromptu share of something that happened over the fall that I never at the time did sort of a debrief online. And it's a follow-up to the talk that I gave about electric autonomous vehicles and in-car meditation, based on a slide share that my friend Laura had sent me from Paul Pangaro, who was sort of a protege of Gordon Pask and has held Gordon Pask's legacy, Pask being I don't know, I sort of consider him the vaudevillian cyberneticist. And it was about like in-car meditation in smart cars. And it was sponsored by Subaru, which is funny because I have a Subaru Sally, and Citigroup and some insurance company. And so a lot of the payments, they kept talking about payment systems like outgoing, like, you know, paying for your subscription for your radio programs, or paying for tolls, or paying for like all the outgoing. But I think really in the future, based on this meditation concept, because all you have to do is go online and look up blockchain token payments for meditating, and there's a lot of them, that, you know, people are going to be floating around in immersive reality in their smart cars doing meditation and then getting some kind of token payments for it. So the future of information processing could look a lot like a Los Angeles traffic jam full of a lot of smart cars. And that's my thought experiment. And I do really think that the future of information processing is some combination of embodied human psyches that are accessing quantum information fields, and engineered intelligence, whether that's like we perceive that we're engineering it or it's being engineered from the outside, that's holding really sophisticated relational patterns. And as my shorthand version is Animist live action role play musical, but in cars maybe. And so I uploaded that right before I went to a conference in Springdale, Arkansas. And Springdale is up in the northwestern part of the state, and it's kind of like one of those smart city mega regions. It goes from Fayetteville, where the University of Arkansas is, and then up north to Bentonville, which is the corporate campus of Walmart. And so it's a very nice area, like very highly developed, lots of amenities, but definitely sort of being set up to be one of these sort of super regions, like interconnected super regions. And Springdale is probably one of the poorer communities there. I think there's a lot of like trucking and poultry processing. And so it was just like this conference was in a Holiday Inn off the interstate. And I have a friend who was going there, and it's called the Ozark Research Institute. You can look it up. And they've been meeting since, I don't know, like the mid to late 1980s. And in a Holiday Inn in Springdale, Arkansas. And it was interesting because the group was, I don't know, maybe the event went from like a Friday afternoon through a Monday morning. And over the weekend, which is like on Saturday was probably the fullest day. Maybe there's 100 people, like maybe 150, but for a lot of the time it was probably half of that. And it seemed like of those people who were attending, easily half of them all knew each other, had been coming for years. It was like their second family, like home away from home sort of thing. And it was really interesting to go because everybody was super friendly, and it was a different flavor of like energy work that I'm not better or worse, just different. Like, so, here you might have the, Eastern mysticism yoga version or the crystal version, but this had more of an overtone of sort of Midwestern spiritualism and sort of unity church vibe there. And the group, they have 2 conferences a year. One, I think in the spring, is a dowsing conference. But people dowse for all kinds of information. And they use, you can use pendulums to dowse, you can use rods to dowse, you can even use just your body to dowse. So I haven't been to the dowsing conference. This one was on health. And so that was the fall one. And so anyway, it was an interesting vibe. I had a friend who was presenting. I ended up staying the whole time. And I was really intrigued because one of the sessions was on remote viewing. And I'd been reading a lot about remote viewing, precognition, retrocausality, psi abilities. I don't feel like I myself have strong abilities in that area, but I do have like intuitive knowings about things, and mine are more pattern related or symbolic related or correspondence related than specific messages or images per se. It's like I have feelings and I can sense the patterns, like feel into the patterns. But I was intrigued by the remote viewing. So that was like on the second day. And what was interesting is most of the presenters were just regular folks. Now, the background on this is it was founded by Harold McCoy and his wife Gladys. And Gladys is still alive. Harold has passed. And Gladys, I'm not sure, she's probably in her late 70s or early 80s. And they have like a little fundraising auction. And these are not like, trips to Greece. They're like little sets of paperbacks or candles, or like they're modest. Like it's a very homespun, let me say. Like it's very homespun, but very warm and caring. And so Gladys had a whole table set out where she was selling crocheted Afghans. And it turns out that even though it was the fall and it wasn't really that cold, the hotel was way over air conditioned. And so people were buying the Afghans and wearing them around like coats because it was so cold in the conference room. So it's that kind of thing. Like it's just homespun. But the thing about Harold is if you look up the Ozark Research Institute online, it has his biography. It says that he spent like 20 something years in the US Intelligence Service. And so that's pretty interesting. But he also, his work and what founded the Institute was in healing. And his healing practices were very much based in Christian faith and energy work, healing, but from a spiritual standpoint. But then he had this intelligence background, and it's kind of like the quiet underlying that some of the cash flow that may have come, and I can't prove this, but like several people mentioned this to me, was probably like there was a pipeline from the CIA or something. Intelligence, like what is this intelligence? I don't know. And I don't really think in a nefarious way. If you look, you would not be like, oh, well, this is like clearly a CIA operation. Like, no, it's like, would you like to buy an Afghan? It's not that. But like, it makes me question our understandings of what all of these institutions actually are. And So anyway, so Harold was involved in the intelligence service. He was also a Christian healer and a dowser. And then it sounds like a really wonderful person. And there are a lot of people in the room who have more ability to feel into other presences in the room. And so I think, like, supposedly, his spirit was there with us, which is kind of interesting thing about. And I know, like, my friend who presented talks about being able to, like, share or get intelligence or support from Harold. So in terms of me thinking about these archetypal patterns, that's pretty interesting. Like, I'm intrigued by entertaining these possibilities. So cool. So Harold and Gladys, awesome. So Gladys is still there. Definitely more of sort of Midwestern spiritualist, but also the crystal skull people, but super friendly. Like, everyone was super friendly. And one of the women who said she was more the crystal skull kind of person, and she was telling me, we had breakfast. There's like an included breakfast at the like included in your hotel room, very nice breakfast buffet. And so we were having breakfast, and she was filling me in on sort of the history, because she'd been coming since, like I said, probably the 80s, and that there was one year where for some reason a lot of the regulars didn't make it. But there was a huge bunch of women from China who all came, and they were talking, and like not all of them actually really had much English, but they were like energetically like exchanging stuff. And she looked at the woman and said, "This is the witches of the East meets the witches of the West." and I, not that I consider myself a witch, but it is this esoteric energy work. It's quite interesting. So yeah, so this is all going in the background in Springdale, Arkansas, which is like right off the interstate, in a town that does poultry processing. And this is kind of what my life is now, which is this quirky things of seeming super pedestrian and also really fascinating and interesting. And so there were a number of presentations. I was really intrigued by the remote viewing, because I'd been looking at, like, Julia Mossbridge's work and thinking about like the Gateway Project and astral projection, and it fitting in with this thought experiment that I'm having, that if this is a live action role play musical and we're doing gamified teaming and working with the Akashic or information fields, like what does that look like? And the remote viewing seemed to be part of it. So I'm sitting there in the conference room, again, 70 to 100 people maybe. And the presenters, so most of the other presenters are just regular folks like me, and they're there because they're part of the community. They have many of them have their own abilities, their own angles on things. They were taught by Harold or other mentors who had abilities in healing and dowsing, and they were just regular folks. Like, they didn't come with like, let me show you my CV. This woman who presented on the remote viewing, her name was Jennifer Prather, and it was Jennifer with one N, so Jenifer, and Prather is Prather. And she was a little bit more suited up, like not a three-piece suit or anything, but she was definitely more like buttoned up. And she went into all of her credentials. Like, she's a registered nurse, and she has a master's in public health, and she has a PhD in some other medical thing. And she was connected with the University of Tennessee health system in Memphis. And Memphis is really just over the Mississippi. Well, it's probably 2.5 hours from Hot Springs. It's like maybe a little over an hour from Little Rock. So it's not that far. But she had come, she had all her credentials, and her presentation, it wasn't just remote viewing, but it started out with mindfulness and forest bathing. And that was the lead in to, and at the time, this would have been like mid-October. And so she had this really soft touch. She's like giving all of her credentials. And then she's like, the holidays are coming up and you're anxious. And so this is like, here's some mindfulness practices. And once or twice, too many times, she mentioned evidence-based, which for me, like, triggers the whole data-driven, pay-for-success, value-based healthcare, biometric monitoring, and, and all the things that go with that. And so again, she had this soft sell about like, using mindfulness to get through the anxiety of the coming holiday season. And that's what she led with. And then she went into specifically talking about the Japanese practice of forest bathing. And for me, it's interesting because, I used to work at Bartram's Garden in Philadelphia. I worked there for 17 years. And about a year after I started researching pay for success and value-based healthcare, uh, I did come across the forest bathing, and I'm like, man, that's going to be like, it's like, meditation, right? Tokenized meditation. I'm like, that's going to be a pay for success. Like here, it's like the kids in kindergarten, put on your smart shoes and play with some toys and we'll digital twin you and make some tokens out of it. That they would do that with forest bathing somehow. And then of course, at the time there was also, Leo and I did a talk about this Berlin-based organization, Curve Labs, where they were setting up augmented reality games in public parks where there was a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, that was a tree, and children were supposed to use smartphones to explore the park in augmented reality through like sigils, and it was a game of sigils. There were two words, and I can't remember. One was sigils and oracles, maybe sigils and oracles, and like little altars, and then they were supposed to take pictures of bugs and then write poems to bugs, because again, I think the poetry is compressed qualia-based subjective information, and then upload them to the DAO of the tree so the tree could become alive, which is kind of a weird thing. And the people who were presenting, it was on Zoom, and they had like the overlay of like the costumes, and they had like their third eye with like a little crown and like sparkles and things, and they're based in Berlin, Curve Lab. So I was like, okay, this forest bathing thing, I'm not sure, right? And so one day I was at the garden, and I was walking, I don't know, like around there was like Philadelphia's oldest barn, and there's a brick courtyard where they used to have a lot of events, and then the other buildings, and there was this woman walking through, and I think I just struck up a conversation, like, do you need something, or can I help you, or whatever? And she said she was there because she was, like an independent person scouting out places to do forest bathing. But I think it was like as a business opportunity. Like she was looking for places that she could bring people to do forest bathing. And at the time I was, and this was pre-lockdown. So, this is maybe 2018. I'm like, hey, you might want to look into pay for success finance and value-based healthcare and social prescribing and what this all is, like with wearables and things. And yeah, so, and again, that was the thing in the smart car. Right before I went to the conference, I uploaded this whole thing about meditating in smart cars. And part of it was, besides the dashboard economy system, was that you would have an immersive environment in the windows that had smells, and all the windows could be turned into TV screens. And they were like, you could forest bathe in your car. And so here she's talking about forest bathing, and I was like, oh my gosh, really? Like I just uploaded this talk, and now, and so I went up because they had a mic open, and like at a pause, I went up and I said, excuse me, but I'm just wondering, because in your capacity as a researcher, and she specifically had put out her credentials, right? Like most people were there because they were, people with abilities, healers, people who had personal experiences, but she was there as the professional, right? And so she was presenting herself as a researcher. And I said, so as a researcher, as part of this University of Tennessee health system, I'm curious. I know that there's a lot of research now into mindfulness and meditation. And I hear you mention evidence-based, and so I'm wondering if within the research community there are conversations about wearables in the context of mindfulness and meditation, and how they interface with wearable technology and electronic, blockchain electronic health records. Because and she got really, like, you could see like the hair, like, because she was playing it really cool, like, oh, you should just be chill because the holidays are coming and you want to learn how to be relaxed and be not anxious. And she looks at me, she says, it sounds like you have an opinion about this. And it's funny because I just spoke today, then this is the reason I'm doing it today, is like I spoke with someone who is in the room today, and she's like, yeah, I remember that. She was really angry with you asking that question. And the thing is, I wanted to ask the question because I actually, for the most part, the people in the room I felt were, I'm not saying for the most part, they felt like very trustworthy, caring people who understood the importance of subtle energy and the spiritual side of being embodied. And many of them the conference was on healing. So they had a healing component. And I wanted them to be aware that the alternative medical establishment, because the pay for success is going to really push into the alt health movement. And this is, I did a talk on this with Sarah G in like 2021. I'm like, hey, alt health people who are providing these services, that is the data that they want. And so ultimately you're going to have to, down the road, decide, are you going to step into the pay for success evidence-based medicine program and put your patients on blockchain? And I'm not going to tell you good, bad on it, but just be prepared that that's where the road's going. They want that information. And that was before I knew about the Emerald Gate Foundation and all of their work in subtle energy and sort of social systems research and how all that was going. So the woman was very upset, but I thought the people in that room deserved to know. Now, the challenge is, for the most part, people have, like, I've been researching pay for success finance since 2013, pretty much. So 12 years more. And nobody knows about it still. Like, no, you don't hear about anybody in the alt press talk about it. It essentially, pay for success turned into either Agenda 21 Rosa Corey or ESG woke, anti-woke. And we still don't talk about cybernetics or gamified wellness situations or mindfulness or embodied psychology and information processing. And that isn't something that really anybody has any, and there's several steps that you have to get to be able to engage in that conversation. And I'm not saying 100% for sure that this is definitely what's happening, but I'm good at patterns and I'm good at holding a lot of diverse information. And so I physically attach them into these digital maps. And so I would like to sort of lay out the information that I've seen and the story I feel like could be told with this information from the standpoint of a curious observer. I'm not judging, and I know that there's a lot of stuff I don't know, but this is what it looks like to me at this point, and what do we think and how do we feel about it as a society? Like, is this something that we feel good about? Namely, that there are going to be financial investment structures attached to these electronic healthcare records. And we're not there yet. And in fact, I was actually really sad yesterday morning because I was super excited. I did the read aloud of Babel 17, and then I found there are these folks on this AGLX podcast who, oh my gosh, they are into complexity theory. And they have like a lot of the people that I'm very intrigued by as guests on their podcast. So I've been sort of binge watching the pieces that are interesting to me in their work in complexity and doing what I do, which is like, screenshotting and pulling little crib notes and things. And one of their interviews was with Alicia Guerrero. And what I really appreciate about Alicia Guerrero's she has very pithy, useful statements. And again, we don't share the same context. Like she lives in a certain space and I live in a certain space, but there's stuff like Conrad Waddington's epigenetic landscape and how that works with attractor fields and community currencies that I find fascinating. And so being able to go through and make these clips that they resonated in my body so deeply about how important they were. And I just wanted to, a lot of times I put these clips up because I feel like they're notes for me. And it's useful for me later because I can send them to people and say, remember, look at these three things together. Here's a suite of bits of information. And do you see how they flow together? How they complement one another, how they tell a story. And it's not me saying it, it's the clip saying it. So then people can, I think, process it easier. And so I was so excited about it. So I uploaded those clips and and then the next morning, because usually it's in the evening when I upload the clips, and literally the first comment was, "You're over," and so I uploaded the clips and I put in the pinned comment sort of guiding principles. Here are the things when I hear this that I'm thinking about, and these are all things that I've talked about in the past. And often I'll put maps with it, which are the guideposts of you can go in and poke around and see. And if I found someone who was leaving crumbs like that in something I was interested in, I would be so excited. And like the closest I found are these AGLX podcast people. And we don't have a direct, exact correspondence to all the same things that we care about. But like I can learn stuff from, we have enough overlap that there's like new novel information to incorporate. I find it very cool. And so I don't know if literally I'm just such a weirdo that after 13 years working on this particular part of the puzzle, no one has wandered over to like look. And I'm not saying no one. So like at this point, I used to say like, I'm really excited to have like about a dozen people who really care about this. And at this point, it's down to like, I think maybe I can count them on one hand. So it's shrinking. And so I wake up in the morning and the first thing is like, you're overthinking it. You're overthinking it. Now, I know not to take this personally, but still, it's like, why do you need to come to somebody's party and like you couldn't say so then the next comment was, you're just making it too complicated and you're using these big words people don't understand and it really turns people off. I'm not using big words. I'm using the words that you use to talk about this thing. And if you haven't learned them, then you can't talk about it. But you could learn them because I didn't know them and I learned them. So, and I've left way more material. Like you're ahead of where I was because I actually am gathering resources and laying them out and like offering them for free to people. So the first one was like, you're overthinking it. The second one was you're making it too hard and there's words we don't understand and it turns this to real turn off. And then the third person, I don't know, I think this third person just likes to come and like, I don't know, be challenging on my page, which is fine. But like the line was, maybe you should be more humble. Now, and who knows, I know like online you can't really presume, but the avatars of all three of these people appear to be women. Like, I don't know for sure that they're women, but I'm like, we're already dealing with a bunch of shit. Like, why do women have to be bitches to other women? Like, I didn't ask for that. Like, I'm super excited to be like, oh my gosh, I have a jewel and I polished it off and I like edited it down and offered it to you with some information. And then everyone like comes over and shits on it. And like, I get it now. Like, I can intellectually get it because, okay, you're in a world model. You have a reality tunnel. You are not going to invest the energy to learn anything about the words or the concepts because there's no incentive structure, right? Like I'm going to work really hard and do all this stuff so I can stand over there with Alison because she's by herself. No, like I get it that there's no logic to that. People want to stay in a world model where they get to hang out with a bunch of people and shoot the shit. And that's why everybody's on Substack. And so I get it, but it still makes me sad. So if you're watching this, like, I'm a big girl and I can put on my big girl pants and go back and do some more research, but I could imagine that I'm really way off base about this, except I end up in Hot Springs knowing a friend who does healing work that I go to this conference and there's a woman, and this woman, Jennifer Preether, she was on the head research committee for the International Remote Viewing Association. And that's like, Ingo Swann, Harold Puthoff, like all the key people, that's the organization that and like this was in mid-October, and I think a month later they were having their annual meetup in White Sands, New Mexico, right? And I keep talking about radiation, right? So they're going to meet up in White Sands, and it's not Albuquerque. Like easily people could fly into Albuquerque, but it's in White Sands, and they're doing remote viewing with AI. And then a month later, I'm at an event with a woman whose father was a really important symbolic artist connected to the Summer of Love and sort of Sufi mystics and psychedelics. And she's like, and I'm trying to talk about art and tokenization and Alice Walton and Crystal Bridges. And she's like, well, my uncle was recruited to do remote viewing for crypto in Hawaii, which is like a center of US intelligence. And it's just, and it turns out like her grandfather was probably Bugsy Siegel, the gangster who started Las Vegas, who learned the ropes of gaming and gambling and probability and stats from Oni Madden, who was the kingpin of illegal gaming here in Hot Springs. So there are too many things that happen to me in my life that are too far off of normal things that I'm not onto something. Unless this whole thing that I'm doing is I'm making it up in my head as I go along. Like, it's in my perception, it is all really happening. Like, I was really in the room with Jennifer Prather and I said, so what do you think? Are the researchers talking about the ethics of wearables and mindfulness and blockchain healthcare records? And then I went on to say, because there were these new investment models in wellness and that are being piloted, and people are going to become investable commodities in their wellness tied to mindfulness. And we're here in Northwest Arkansas, in which Alice Walton, one of the richest women in the world, daughter of Sam Walton of Walmart, is here with Deepak Chopra, establishing new centers for new health systems and rural healthcare. And it's a lot. I said it matters. Like, we're actually situated, Springdale is maybe 20 minutes south of Bentonville, but like, we're here at this time. And actually in that same area, there's a woman, Dana Klassanens, who is a complexity systems engineering person who is working on rewilding the mind, which meshes with the forest bathing. So the woman was super nasty. So she looked at me and she literally like held up her hand, and she had an aura ring on her hand. Now remember, I'm talking about Emerald Gate Foundation and the subtle energy. And she looks at me in not a friendly way, and she starts twisting the ring on her hand, like up by her face, like not subtly, like down. She's like up here. And she's like, I love to collect all the data. I love to collect all the data. And it wasn't just me, because again, it reminded me today, there was someone I was reconnecting with, and they were like, yeah, I saw that. That was kind of crazy. So they didn't I didn't say how I felt about it. I just said, it's something we need to talk about, because there are new investable models in mindfulness. And this mindfulness was a direct segue into remote viewing, right? And the wearables and the EHR. So after that, I went home, and of course I did some research on Jennifer Prather, and, saw her background, which she had mentioned. And besides being like on the research committee of the International Remote Viewing Association, she when she had done her PhD, she did some postdoc work at the University of California, San Francisco. And now I'm not saying she knew about this particular program, because I'm sure UCSF situation is very big, but she was working in essentially wearable technology and big data. Now, UCSF, like, my spidey senses go up, because when I was doing the research on the 4 pilot pay for success finance programs in Santa Clara County, California, there were 2 that were education, pre-K and early literacy, and then there were 2 that were social services, which were homelessness, that one was called Project Welcome Home, and mental health, which is called Partners in Wellness. And the homelessness one and the mental health one, there were deal verifiers. That's how Pay for Success works. There's a third party that's supposed to provide an impartial review of the data to assess if they met their impact metrics. And in both of those deals, Palantir was the deal assessment person. Now, this was, I think the deals were in like 2012, 2015, something like that. I think the first one, Pay for Success, came over with Michael Bloomberg from Roland Cowood in the UK to Rikers Island. I think that was 2012. So these might have been 2015 with the Nonprofit Finance Fund and Social Finance and George Overholzer. And so Palantir was on the back end of that, on the homelessness and mental health. Now, we understand too, if you can imagine, that the homelessness and looking at like the Internet of Things tiny houses, like the casitas that I was talking about in Austin, that you can start to pair housing first policies with well-being quantified self-management. And those could be people returning from prison, people with mental health issues, veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, other things. Like, there's this overlap between the mental health and supportive housing. And so to me, that is the mental health aspect is getting into altered states, especially since we see now that there's this huge push for psychedelic assisted therapy. Like, oh, do you have alcoholism? Let's give you some psychedelics and get over it. And, and there may be, I'm not saying that there's not some, that might not be effective. I'm open to the fact that it could be effective. But at the same time, I've read Jamie Wheal's book, Stealing Fire, and they talk about ecstasis and getting into altered states and accessing these other information fields, and that psychedelics, is a big part of it. And that the plan is that in the future, people will have a printer in their homes where they can print all medications, including psychedelic drugs. And, there are some people who are all about legalization, and they're like, well, that sounds pretty good to me. And I'm like, okay, but it's probably going to be put there by your insurance company, right? Like Kaiser Permanente is going to install your psychedelic printer in your kitchen. And I read the short story from the Oxford American by that guy, I think his name is Van Diamondfinger, called On the Domestic Front, which was essentially, and this was maybe 10 years ago, but it was a short story about a man who was kind of trapped in a smart house with appliances run by his HMO and what that was like in a depressive state. And it wasn't good. And so I'm like, okay, well, they have very clear patient compliance indicators. So it could be that like it prints out some DMT and you have to do your daily dose and report back, or not even report back, just put on your wearable or your galvanic skin response, and something goes up to the cloud and goes up there, and then that part of the pattern recognition starts figuring stuff out for information processing. And at the time, I was asking like about the DMT. People were more familiar because I don't do psychedelics, but like, why DMT? Like, why would that be an attractive option? And all you have to do is like look for like research papers on DMT and anxiety or depression. There's like hundreds of them, right? So this is all being set up. Evidence-based, the evidence base says. And so, okay, and the person I spoke with said, well, the thing about DMT is generally it's fast, like it's done in 20 minutes. And DMT is something that's in your body, so you can't really drug test it. And, it doesn't wig you out the rest of the day. If you're dealing in more like plant medicine kind of stuff, psilocybin or ayahuasca or whatever, you really don't know exactly how it's going to play out. It could be really long and take a really long time, be really unpleasant. So that's not something you could like require people to do before they go into work. And so where this fits in weirdly back into remote viewing and mindfulness, like mindfulness is another altered state, not quite the same altered state as psychedelic drugs, but a different altered state. And so this was the lead in the session to remote viewing. Now, I have to admit, I was super So anyway, Jennifer again. So Jennifer was at UC. Oh, okay. Sorry. Too many things. Okay. So we have Partners in Wellness, Mental Health, UCSF, Palantir. All right. Now, as far as I know, psychedelic assisted therapy wasn't what they were talking about at that time. It might have been some other treatment. But clearly, a lot of mental health stuff is dovetailing with the psychedelics now. And I know that there are people now who say it can work. And so if this idea is that it can work and we're going to create a really managed environment with the proper health supports and the proper screenings, and once you do it, you're like, it resolves, it's like one and done pretty much. Like you don't have to do it every day or every week. If that's the case, why is Jamie Wheal talking about a future where we all have pharmaceutical printers that would be provided to us by our HMO? That doesn't make sense. That's not the same as like, I'm going to go to a medical facility and be properly screened for a certain treatment. And then I'm going to be monitored over the course of like this weekend. And then I'm going to resolve my problem. And then I'm going to come back and my life's going to be good. And I don't have to do it again. That's a different thing. Like you don't need an at-home psychedelic printer to do that. And so I have this dissonance of like, okay, if we go with this version that it's a one and done under proper controls, it doesn't mesh with the at-home psychedelic. So which is it? Like, which is the direction we're going for the future? And the thing is, Peter Thiel of Palantir is a major investor in Atai Biosciences, which is doing the psychedelic research. So, okay, so that's UCSF. And I'm not saying that Jennifer herself has an awareness of that social impact bond or that she's pro-psychedelics. Like, I don't know where she stands on any of that, but she was in the milieu of UCSF, and UCSF is pursuing that kind of work. Okay, so she does her research on wearables, And then later, there's 2 different papers that she's a co-author on. And the papers have many co-authors because I think they were collecting lots and lots of data. And so like one of them was maybe 30 co-authors and one of them was maybe 50, but they both involved COVID and wearables and temperature, body temperature with those Aura rings. So when she's like, yes, I collect all the data. Like for me, I'm like, bing, 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 UCSF and Palantir and psychedelics and remote viewing. Like it, and literally I'm kind of freaking out because something in me, because I don't do that many videos anymore, like something said, you need to get your stuff together about this car, this slide deck that was a presentation in 2018 to Samsung about smart car, autonomous vehicles, and meditation and in-car economic systems. You have to do that before you go. And literally I uploaded it and I packed the car and I drove up to Springdale. And so then 2 days later, I'm sitting in this room and this woman's like, she didn't talk about cars and forest bathing. And I hadn't done the car meditation into remote viewing, but you can see the trajectory of like getting your smart car in an immersive environment. We'll pipe in the smells of the creek babbling and the moss and the frog sounds or whatever, and you can just meditate and go there. And so after this very unpleasant exchange with her in front of the whole audience, but none of them really understood what I was saying. So, you know, I had to leave. I did not want to stay for her remote viewing exercise. So I actually went up and did a heart-based energy intention at the Walmart corporate campus, which is another world altogether. And I'll have to maybe do a slideshow about that sometime and show you the images up there. But big healthcare, big wellness complex, by the way, it takes up like two city blocks there. So that's what I did. So I walked out of the room. I'm just like, oh, and I went up to Bentonville. And then I came back, and either later that afternoon or the next day, I was speaking with a woman, and she was a keynote presenter, and she was an RN many years. I would say she's probably I'm not great with ages, but late 60s, early, like she'd spent her career, but not really happy with the medical establishment. And she had healing abilities. And so I went over to her because I thought she would be able to follow what I was saying. And I'm like, listen, I've encountered these papers where they talk about that they're going to measure the energy in healers' hands, like in terms of value-based healthcare, that they would literally rank energy healers by like the subtle energy coming off of their bodies. And to me, that feels really invasive and inappropriate. And she looked at me and she said, I actually have already done that. And she said, and I don't know what the circumstances were, but that she was in China and that they, in the context of like, it was a simulation, it wasn't actual, but like frontline medical care in battle conditions and using chi. And she's like, they measured my chi. And then they said, well, why don't you give it all you can? And she did. And then she said she kind of collapsed for like 3 days and she should not have done that. And she wouldn't have done it, would not do it again. But this is a real thing. This is really happening. And so I asked her later about the remote viewing exercise. And it turns out, so the remote viewing wasn't at a distance. It was an object that she had placed in a box in the room. And so it was sort of, I guess, like a meditation that people were supposed to sort of feel into qualities of what they imagined was the object in the box. And from what I understood in the room, then people would offer the impressions they got, the sensations they got, whether it was a color or a shape or a quality. And everybody got different things because people are built differently. And ultimately, what was in the box was a jeweled roach brooch. That's kind of crazy. Like it was of all the things to put in a box. And there is something about like the philosopher Wittgenstein, he had something about a beetle in a box, that your identity is like a beetle and you have it in a box and you can describe it, but no one will ever know exactly what your beetle is. And so it's like she put her beetle in a box, only it was a jeweled roach brooch. And so nobody guessed jeweled brooch, but they would have like, I guess, red or shiny or hard or, there were all of these different things. And so if you imagine that room as a team or a superorganism, they were each independently trying to use their embodied psyche, and the body is important, to project into that space to get a clue as to what it was. And you can imagine how that information might go up into a data lake, and a pattern recognition software would say, oh, might it be a roach brooch? And initially I asked, I was like, are you sure it was a roach? Like, could it have been another kind of beetle? Because the University of Tennessee Health Center in Memphis is only about 5 miles from the University of Memphis. And I think they're separate institutions, but they're in close proximity. And it turns out the University of Memphis actually has a really robust program in Egyptian antiquities. And, like Memphis has that big glass modern pyramid, like right on the Mississippi River, which is some like powerful energy stuff. And I'm like, could it have been like a scarab beetle or something? And they're like, no, it was a roach. So, anyway, so that's what I wanted to share tonight. Because in reflecting on this Babel 17, and again, this is one of these kind of interesting synchronous serendipitous things, is that Samuel Delany, who was the author of the book, and this is from 1966, he was in New York and like in an avant-garde sort of setting. And my ex-husband's uncle, his name was John Herbert McDowell. And I never got to meet him because he died before I met my husband, but he was a composer and a choreographer. And like, it seems like he reminds me of like the pictures of Gordon Pask, like somebody who was like funny and quirky and had a really interesting view on things, like very anti-establishment, non-traditional. And he was friends with Delany, and Delany in 1971 made a short film called The Orchid, which was a very odd film. Evidently, like in the World Science Fiction, they screened it at the World Science Fiction Conference or something in New York, and there was a riot or something about the movie. I don't know. But the movie was filmed with a lot of like non-professional actors. And John Herbert McDowell, the composer, my ex-husband's uncle, he was working with something called the Judson Dance Project at the Judson Church. And so this dance project was about choreography that was using regular people and regular bodies in musical composition of like making it accessible to everyday people in how you use your body and how you communicate. And the more time I spend on all of this, the more I realize that it's embodied cognition, and not just cognition in terms of your immediate 5 senses, but your intuitive cognition, your psi-ability, these clairvoyant abilities that I think that we have to cultivate. And one of the scenes in the part 1 that I read with Rydra Wong, the commander of this mission, is, she's deciding to take this spaceship and try to like figure out what's happening with this Babel 17 language. And she thinks that she can figure out where the next accident is going to happen and take a spaceship and get there and try to intervene. And she's speaking to her mentor and her sort of, foster parent. She's an orphan, and talking about what had happened in a conversation she had with this general, and that she had these abilities of telepathy. And, in the book, they kind of describe her, today they would say neurodiverse or spectrumy or whatever, but she has this intuitive knowing and this ability. She's a poet. So she's a female Chinese spectrumy poet who's doing a military mission in linguistics. and she says, I feel I'm so empathetic. I feel other people's half understood thoughts, and they're so muddled, and I have to, it's painful for me. And so I take them in and I polish them and clear them up and structure them and turn them into poems and then offer them back. But she does it not so much as art as like a process to deal with her own pain of having to deal with people whose inner knowingness is really out of whack. But then she also has this ability to kind of almost read into people's minds. And that first scene with the general of setting up this mission, there's a lot of aspects of communication and miscommunication and misunderstandings, or things that are unsaid or things that are misunderstood. And so she's sharing this with her her mentor, and he's still not quite getting it. And she's like, I can get into your mind and understand what you are, but nobody can get into mine. Like, I'm trying to communicate something, and the opposite isn't true. Like, I have to absorb other people's things and process it and then offer it back, but nobody can get into my space and do that for me. And she was really frustrated. And, I'm not saying that I have her abilities in terms of the qualities of being an amazing poet or an intuitive, but I do really feel her when she's like, I would like to merge in a way that I can, all of these loose bits that are, my body and my psyche are holding in tension in this sort of excited and interested knowing way of the potential, and offering it out in a way that will make sense to people or that people can engage with. And I'm not saying this in a whiny way, but like, that was what was so discombobulating when I went to bed so excited to find these Alicia Guerrero clips about complexity, and really making these connections between bioelectricity and community currencies and gaming and teaming, and how literally in Babel 17, the pilot of the ship has to wrestle it in his body, right? And how that relates to John Herbert McDowell and using bodies in the Judson Dance Project of regular people to intuit and communicate in ways that are just not professional, but also very visceral and real. And the piloting is the navigation, but you're navigating in this psychic embodied system, and that you're doing it as a team. And that whole first part was her putting together this team that was really unusual, right? That she was looking for certain qualities of like naivete, or trying to heal this triple by finding the missing partner, or searching for the discorporate, the people who didn't have bodies to do the work that only people who didn't have bodies could do. And that the pilot needed to wrestle, and then the body modifications that he would do to integrate, like man and machine, like the pilots, into that space energetically to steer the ship through his embodied intelligence. And, even I'm making some more clips from the same talk with Guerrero and the Brian Rivera on the AGLX podcast. And they're talking about interoception and proprioception, and this John Boyd's idea of the fingertip touch and this intuitive knowingness, and how it relates to markets. But I have this intuitive knowingness of these gaming systems, and my friend Laura, she shared with me a talk by from the Stoa or whatever, but it was with a professor of philosophy and art and gaming at no less than the University of Utah, right, where the first object was put into the internet. And his name is T. Nguyen. I'm terrible at pronouncing that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're the person. You can do art and agency and gaming and rules and affordances and degrees of freedom, but not just like the mechanics of gamification like Kevin Werbach over at Wharton, but like the depth of what it is to be part of a team and either cooperating or competing. And one of the games he's talking about is called The Mind, where it's just a very simple game with numbers, a deck of cards 1 to 100, and you deal them out amongst 4 people, and they're supposed to lay them out in ascending numerical order, I think. But they don't see each other's cards, and they're not allowed to speak or signal. So you have to intuit what card to put down, or like how to, like who puts what card. And it's about getting in sync. It's about entraining together as a group of 4 people. It's this teaming mentality. And like, I think he says like the timing, he describes it as timing, but I'm like, it is telepathy. It is this psychic team bonding. It is getting in the information field of, 4 people I don't know would make a super organism, but an organism, like an intelligence, a group mind. And so I can really appreciate that idea of community currencies and J.G. Bennett's idea of psychokinetic communities and how that mixes up with like the Meadow Creek, Arkansas project with David Orr and Lawrence, funded by Lawrence Rockefeller and William Irwin Thompson and Maurice Strong. And like, what does all that mean that was in Arkansas and Bill Clinton having the first climate conference there? And like, who would think this was all in Arkansas, right? Like that I would leave Philadelphia, which is such a deep and heavy, archetypally, informationally embedded place, and come here, which you would imagine to be just on the outskirts, but it turns out to be this like highly resonant, encoded landscape of its own. And am I creating that? Like, is that part of this live action role play? Is that we're living in the stories of our mind, and as creative and imaginative as we can be, we can make it so, right? We can make a Vesta house happen. Like we can bring in rewilding and remote viewing with roach brooches, and it's kind of cool. So I don't know if this is all hanging together for people, but I have a lot of clips. I encourage you to watch my other clips. I'm not going to take the time to edit it all and drop them all in. You can see them on my page. And I realize that very few people, even if I leave all these crumbs, are going to pick them up. Because even of my clips, even the ones that get a lot of views, that may be 200. And I don't know how many people even click on the maps that I include. And I did reach out to Professor Nguyen, and like I sent him several frantic emails. I'm like, you would get it. I know you would get it. It's kind of like when I found Edward Frankel. I'm like, you would get it. You know the math. You would understand like flying the attractor landscape and the Akashic records and getting things and foraging and teaming and how that all might work. And, one of the things I did say to T. Nguyen in the email, I was like, you understand, right? And I can imagine this idea of teams going into information spaces and altered states, of accessing the boundary of systems in Hilbert space superpositions, with blockchain being these resonating relational maps of inner webbing, and playing those spaces, right? Like having our higher selves or our digital twins in those spaces where we physically can't go, but we are connected, by the cord to places that have more amazing imaginative potential than we don't have words for it. Like that's what is in Babel 17. She's like, if you don't have a word for it, you can't even think about it, right? There are things in those places that we can't even imagine because we don't have words for it, but our higher self does, right? And if you want to call our higher self a digital twin or diamond or like whatever, an angel, like that, in that space, there are things that could be good. Like I want to imagine the good stuff. So how do we play that game that we can get in and then ingress it, right? Like, the Whiteheadian process. How do we get the tokens and guide it in? Like, the airplane, like, come on. Like, how do we bring that? Is that human flourishing? Like I could play the human flourishing game if I got to play it on my terms, but you don't want it to be run by Goldman Sachs and the World Bank unless like you can somehow assure me that they are our guardian angels, which, I'm going to have a hard time believing, but curious observer, I could go there if you have compelling information for me, but tell me. I'm not going to just trust you on it. Like, give me a good reason to believe you. So I want to play the game the way I want to play it. I want it to be something that I choose and with the people that I choose and the team, like right or wrong. Like, if I want to get the lion man to run the thing, that's what I want. If I want the big slug guy and all the first timer kids to be the platoon, that's what I want. Like I want to be able to pick and have that agency. But I would play a game because, in some of these clips, they talk about games, even the rules in the structure that they offer are enabling constraints that give you affordances and abilities that you might not have imagined otherwise. And that's kind of cool. But I would love for us to get to that conversation. And I did that long talk the other day, and, I apologize because I front end loaded it because I'm still a little triggered. Like, I put myself out there as a person. People like, you should be more humble. You're doing it wrong. You're overthinking things. I mean, are you trying to shut me down? Like, just go do you. I'm not, asking you to come over here. I'm not going on pasting my link on everybody's page. But if I'm here, like, if you don't like what I'm saying, like, communicate, right? Like, I have this person who keeps showing up and I'm like, okay, let's communicate. And then there's radio silence. So it's like, I'm going to just throw a rock at you. And then when you like respond, then I'm just going to shut up and pretend like I'm not there. And that's not collegial. Like, that's not the sandbox I'm going to play in. And, but I'm going to have to come to terms with the fact that whatever the sandbox, I'm not trying to be smarter or more academic or whatever. I just like what I like. And what I like is not what most people like. I mean, a lot of stuff that most people like has to do with like movie stars and stuff and TV shows. And, you know, I like a little bit of that, not much, you know, but it doesn't make me better or worse. It's just, we like different things. So, anyway, so that's my story about going to the Ozark Research Institute and then stumbling into the remote viewing forest bathing session that seemed to clearly have to do with wearables and electronic blockchain records. And so I hope to go back in the spring. I should check like when the conference is, because the dowsing one, I'd like to learn how to douse. That would, like, actually I had like a lovely couple here, and they did an energy like quartz grid around my little property, and they dowsed for like energy lines. And I love watching those little rods like do the thing. Like, it's really cool. So there's this information, right? There's all this information that we just kind of wipe right off like it's not real, but it's real. It's just we pick and choose what affirms our world model. So anyway, thank you for tuning in. And like I said, I'm probably going to be snowed in this weekend. Supposedly we're going to have like a foot of snow on Saturday. Hopefully not the ice. So again, send me some good juju that doesn't happen and we keep our power on all weekend. And so I will have time to read part 2 of Babel 17 then. So thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.